Hi everybody, Stuff of Nonsense, lesson number 11. We're doing a lot of lessons. So it's time to talk about the marmalade jar. See, you're not completely getting it on the forum, so I'm going to help you out with it. Okay, so we're in the first chapter of Alice. Oh, do we talk about burning with curiosity? Because I just looked at my page. Burning with curiosity, just to mention a few things. Curiosity is going to come up over and over again in the book. We have the famous line, curiouser and curiouser. And curiosity leads to what? Learning and discovery. And if we're not curious, we don't learn anything. So with all your subjects, you should be thinking about this with school too. Like, and you know, my attitude would be, if you're not curious, fake it, pretend to be curious. You'll learn more. So are you curious about what the orange marmalade, like what's with the orange marmalade jar? I believe that's how I posed it in the study questions. Okay, so she's falling down the rabbit hole. And she picks up a jar and it's labeled, okay, important word, labeled orange marmalade. But to her great disappointment, it was empty. And then there's the death reference. She doesn't want to drop it for fear of killing somebody underneath. So I think that's the very first reference. Yeah, first reference in the book. We've seen it in the prefatory poem, in the withered wreath of flowers to death, but first reference to death. Okay, let's stick with the orange marmalade. What is going on? So I'd argue that this is about identity. So labels, when things are labeled, it's a kind of, I guess, scientific identity. But so it tells us what something is, okay? So labels, however, can be misleading. Okay, and I think that's what's going on here, because the jar says orange marmalade, but it's empty. And Freudians would say that's a sign of oral frustration, that she wants something, she checks, and to her great disappointment, so she doesn't get it. No orange marmalade inside. So on the one hand, you could say this is an empty jar, and you could also say it's an orange marmalade jar, but neither are correct. What is the true identity of the thing she picks up as she's going down the rabbit hole? It's neither an orange marmalade jar, because there's no orange marmalade in it, and it's also not an empty jar, because it's labeled orange marmalade. So Lewis Carroll is very interested, both as a logician and as a writer, and as a very complex person who himself dealt with issues of identity. Let's talk about why. Okay, so his real name is Charles Lutwidge Dodgson. Okay, he uses the nom de plume, which we talked about last week, Lewis Carroll. First indication that identity matters to him. He's a professor at Oxford, known to be smart but extremely boring. Students laughed at him because they fell asleep in his classes. Okay, so that's part of his identity. Serious professor, very religious because he came from a religious family. And then there's another part of him, which is this nonsense writer, Lewis Carroll, right? So he's a person who I'd say has a divided personality. In the old days, they used to say like split personality, but that sounds like almost like schizophrenia. It's not that kind of disorder that we're talking about. A divided self. And many of us have different parts of our identity. But I think he's really interested in this question. And I think that's what the whole orange marmalade jar is doing. So what is the true identity of this object Alice picks up? I told you it's not an orange marmalade jar, and it's also not an empty jar. What's left? And it's not really, it's almost like if you put the two together, aha. I feel like if I was in class, I could wait for one of you clever kids to give me the answer, but I'll just give a few seconds while you're thinking about it. What's the identity of the object? It's an empty jar bearing the label orange marmalade. And then if you think about yourselves, if we want to do it like, you know, are you a kid? Are you a grown-up? Are you a student? Are you a loafer that stays at home and watches Netflix and plays Xbox? Who are you, right? The same questions for all of us all the time. And like Alice, we're always changing. But Lewis Carroll seems to want us to pay particular attention to identity. So who was he? Was he Dodgson, the boring professor? Or was he this free-spirited Lewis Carroll, who the greatest writer of nonsense books ever? Right? Who was he? Both. Right? So identity is complex. Of course, he was more than that too. All right, 4 minutes, 47 seconds. Hope your week is going okay, and that you maybe got to enjoy a little bit of sunshine. And I always say thank you to you for everything that you're doing to keep our world safe. okay? And good luck, because I know it's tough times and people are getting a bit stir crazy. Do your homework. It's good for you, okay? And think about your nonsense projects. And remember about the pleasurable play also. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.